Okay. Can everybody hear me? I'm a little shorter than the other presenters this evening. So good evening. My name is Liz Miller, and I'm in the Communications Department here at Concordia University. I'm your MC for the evening, and it's my great pleasure to host the third event of the 22nd consecutive season of the Concordia University Community Lecture Series on HIV and AIDS. I just want to extend a warm welcome to all the students, faculty, community volunteers, and members of the public who are here with us this evening. Bienvenue. And for those of you who are less familiar with the Concordia HIV/AIDS project, I just wanted to take a moment to share with you its key mandates. The first is to maintain a permanent space for interdisciplinary dialogue and research on HIV and AIDS for the region. The second is to challenge the Academy to confront the societal crisis engendered by HIV and AIDS and to expand its educational mission. The third mandate of the project is to develop awareness of social, scientific, and cultural aspects of the pandemic through community education, internal dialogue in the Academy, social criticism, and the encouragement of volunteering and activism. To nurture the next generation of HIV/AIDS researchers, activists, and teachers within today's student population is one of our most important mandates. So now, to introduce the events of the evening, before the screening begins, I first want to start with some thank yous. I'd like to thank our sponsors, without whom this evening would simply not have been possible. So the principal sponsors are ViV Healthcare, the Office of the President, the Mel Hoppenheim School of Cinema, and a special thanks goes out to Cinema Politica, who makes such critical contribution to events like this at Concordia. Also for tonight's event, we have partnered with the Cinémathèque Québécoise, as well as the following university departments, and I'm just going to read the list. The Simone de Beauvoir Institute, Sociology and Anthropology, Theater, Art History, Communications, Applied Human Sciences, Religion, Geography, Planning, and the Environment, and Political Science. So the way that things will go this evening, we will begin with a presentation by our esteemed speaker. We will then, this will be followed by some comments by our president, our university president, Alan Shepard. After that, we have about 30 minutes for questions and discussion. And during the question and discussion period, what will happen is you'll raise your hand, and Ian, maybe he can identify himself, back there in the snazzy white coat. He will actually be the roaming microphone this evening. So he'll come, if you have a question, you raise your hand, and he will arrive at your doorstep. And also, of course, toutes les questions, on peut faire en français or anglais. Please ask any questions in whatever language you feel most comfortable. At this moment, I'd also like to ask everyone to take a moment and turn off your cell phones. And I will just make the very first pitch of many pitches that I plan to make this evening, because you may or may not know, but this lecture series relies heavily on small contributions to make this happen. And you can do this in one of two ways. You can either fill out a donation form before you leave the event this evening, or you can go to the crowdfunding website, which is hosted by Concordia's Fund One platform. So after pitch number one, I'd now like to bring up Matthew Hay, who is a professor of communication and film studies here at Concordia. I'm sure many of you have taken classes with him, and whose own academic work has actually explored the acclaimed work of tonight's speaker, ROB EPSTEIN.
Good evening. It really is an honor to have been asked by the organizers of the Concordia HIV/AIDS lecture series to introduce tonight's guest. It helps that I suggested to them that they ask me to introduce tonight's guest. It's funny, when I was preparing my comments for tonight, I tried to figure out, for some reason, how many people I've interviewed over the years, and it was a really weird thing to do because I'm really bad at math. But I just sat there and I thought about it. It's been about 25 years I've been working as a journalist, and before that there were academic inquiries when I was a student. And Robert goes way back to that, and I think it's in the thousands for sure, but one of the most rewarding experiences that you can have as a journalist is interviewing someone whose work has actually changed your life. And that is definitely the case with the work of tonight's speaker, Robert Epstein, who comes for this lecture, but I know is really just here for the weather. I mean, it's a scam, right? It's a peak tourism season. In 1985, I went to the Repertory Cinema in my hometown of Edmonton, Alberta, a very conservative part of the country. The cinema is called the Princess Theatre, it still exists. And there I saw a film called The Times of Harvey Milk, which I'm sure many of you have seen. It's a stunning documentary. It's a beautiful portrait of Harvey and the man we lost, and the beautiful vision he had of coalition politics, and the wave of the future that we would work together to try to face off adversarial forces politically. And a couple of years later, when I was an activist at the University of Alberta, we had the first week of gay awareness at the university. It sounds so quaint now, and I made sure that we got the campus cinema to screen the film 2 nights in a row. And what was something that was really beautiful was that a couple of months later, in the subsequent months, 2 different people came to me and said that the week of awareness had really helped them to have the strength to come out to their friends and family, and that the film itself had played a crucial role in that. And they thanked me for programming the film. And I just said, well, write to the filmmakers because they made it. Beautiful, really incredible experience. In 1989, he would co-direct with his partner Jeffrey Friedman the documentary Common Threads, Stories from the Quilt. I hope you've seen that one too. That would also win an Oscar. Both of these films would richly earned Oscars. And we've seen some AIDS documentaries recently looking back at those days, How to Survive a Plague, We Were Here, and United in Anger, and also Veto in particular. But the difference with Common Threads is that the film was made in 1989 and released in 1990, and at that point, it was really the eye of the storm. There was really such a lack of hope around HIV. It was a time of terrible despair. I was there. We were watching friends, constant news of friends getting sick and dying. It was really terrible. It was made at a terrible moment. It was also made at a terrible moment in the culture wars, if you can imagine, when people like Eddie Murphy were getting up and making jokes, really vile jokes about AIDS, which they included those clips in the film. And I don't accept Eddie Murphy's apology. I don't care if he made Dreamgirls. Fuck him. The film gave voice to several people who bravely fought the disease, including, of course, Vito Russo, who died the year that the film came out. And Robert and Jeffrey would then go on to adapt Vito's landmark book, The Celluloid Closet, turning it into an exquisite and insightful look at how gays have been represented in cinema over the decades and how those depictions have changed. These films have all become textbook films. We show them in film school now routinely. I just showed Times of Harvey Milk this last semester. Remarkable film. And the students are all blown away at the end of it. When I was an undergraduate student here at Concordia and I was doing a class project, I wanted to interview Robert about his experiences as a filmmaker. And I was just a student, but I contacted his office in San Francisco, and his assistant set it up, and he agreed, despite an incredibly busy schedule. Took 45 minutes out of his busy day to talk to me, and I was just a student working on a project, not a journalist or anyone else. And he was so generous with his time to help me get an A. It was for Tom's class. Tom, I don't know if you remember that. Do you remember that? Good, you should. I mean, it's been a quarter century, but I was his star student, or so he used to tell me. And I think you tell all the students that, but anyway. And I met Robert when he was here in 1990 screening Common Threads. I believe it was at the Festival du Nouveau Cinema. We're trying to figure out which festival it was at. And we've only talked on the phone since, or emailed. He was a chapter in my book, which was also a great honor. But it's great to see you in person again and see that you're still really hot. On that, you'll see. Oh, you're about to see. On that note, I really want to help you, or ask you to help me and join me in welcoming Robert Epstein.
Thank you. Well, Matthew, you covered everything I was going to say tonight, so bye. No, seriously, thank you all for being here. It's a great honor to be here. And I just want to congratulate Tom and everyone who puts this series together. It's amazing to have found out that it's been going on and that you've been able to sustain it for 20 years, so congratulations. I first met Tom in the late 70s at a weekly salon that happened in an apartment on the Upper West Side. And I was a young filmmaker in my 20s, and it was this weekly gathering of New York gay intelligentsia. So I don't know how I made it there, but somehow I found it. And Tom was this very smart, cute, blue-eyed, blonde-haired, curly-headed guy. Still all of that except for the curls and the blonde hair, but everything else still stands. So it was great to hear from him again and to get the honor of being asked to participate in this series and speak to you all tonight. But when he asked me, I actually said, no, I don't want to do it. Because I felt in the moment that what could I possibly have to say about HIV/AIDS that hasn't already been said so well by so many others, countless opportunities. So I did say no, and then I slept on it for a night and reconsidered, and I thought about my dear comrades, as I often do, close friends that I lost to AIDS. And I thought, well, this would be an opportunity to honor them and to talk about some of them. I think one of the greatest tragedies for me about the plague years is that we lost a generation of gay men. And it's important for future generations to know of them and the work they accomplished and how much more they would have contributed if they were still with us tonight. So I want to start by introducing three of those men, three very close friends of mine who are so important to me in my development as a filmmaker and as a gay man. And I want to start with, first, my mentor, Peter Adair. I became a filmmaker at age 20, working on the groundbreaking documentary Word Is Out, which Peter produced. When I came on the project, Peter, who was 32, had already started the project, and what it ultimately became was the first feature film about gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender people from across America. It was a series of interviews with 26 men and women from all over the country. Ultimately, there were 6 of us who made the film. We called ourselves the Mariposa Film Group. All of us featured here in this photo. That's me, believe it or not, on the left. Peter in the middle. And to give some context about this film, this was still a time when being in the closet was the prevailing identity for the majority of gay people. So for this film to show in theaters and on television around the world in 1977 was a hugely radical event. So I want to start with the first clip I'm going to show tonight, and that's, it's about Peter. So the clip starts with the filmmakers of Word Is Out 30 years later talking about the film and introducing it, and then it segues into an interview with Peter, recorded much later in life in 1990, where he discusses his own mortality after he received his AIDS diagnosis at a time when AIDS was still an inevitable death sentence.
I think it's true for all of us, but working on this film was a life-changing experience.
I thought I came across as somewhat of an idiot. You know, well-intentioned, God knows, but a little bit of an idiot.
I was 19 years old, and I picked up a magazine, and there was a little classified ad in the back of the magazine, which read, "We are looking for a gay male to work on a film about gay lifestyles. No experience necessary, just insane dedication and a cooperative spirit."
Peter had a passion about his own life and about gay people. There were no images of gay people. And I remember him saying he was going to make this film no matter what.
It was the scariest thing. It was like very scary. It was like someone, if you're at a swimming pool and someone said, jump off the high board.
And here were a small group of us that had been gathered on the stage, and the light was shown on us and said, now you speak.
My dad calls and he says, Cindy, I understand you've been in a movie. And I thought, ooh, oh boy.
I had only been out a few years, and I was kind of naive about the whole thing, honestly. And my picture was in the Sunday New York Times, and somebody sent a picture to the mayor and said, did you know you have a lesbian vet in town? I think you ought to run her out of town.
Peter told me, and Vito told me, should I quote it there? He said, got too many dykes in the woods. We need to get some business types in here. But my motivation originally was just to kind of push the peanut along and do what I could for the cause.
Peter turned over the power of the director to the Mariposa Film Group, to all of us. We all participated equally in the shaping of the film. I don't think that we ever really saw ourselves as filmmakers and the other people were subjects. We didn't ever feel separate from who we were talking with.
Most of us aren't from here originally, and we came out here for a reason, and there was a certain culture going on out here that wasn't going on anywhere else in the country. Communal culture.
I mean, the other thing is that we had a lot of fun. We were also, each of us, in our own way, continuing to come out. So the process was so
self-exploratory.
It was self-exploratory, it was affirmative, it was
a fun time.
It was incredible.
How many people?
Sure, at least 100. I know I had at least 25.
Day after day after day.
Peter really guided us through those shoots. He was there at all of them. He did the lighting. I mean, he really, and then he's kind of just sat back and
watched the.
It's like, well, 1, 2.
I'm living out a dream that I and many others of us had. Because every morning I go into this small town and I do yoga, and then I talk with Republicans and Mormons and Baptists, and we disagree, but we love each other.
We got 9 grandkids.
9 grandchildren.
And 2 great-grandchildren.
And they just turned out great. They really did. Don't you
So
think?
did you.
Oh, thanks. Did I grow up already? I wasn't supposed to.
I know.
So that's Peter. I think it gives you a sense of his strength and fortitude and why he was such an important model for me in life and death. The next person is Vito Russo, another dear friend and colleague and the author of the book The Celluloid Closet, which was a pioneering work about the portrayal of gay and lesbian characters in the movies since the beginning of movies. And I want to introduce Vito with a clip where he was the MC at the premiere of my film, The Times of Harvey Milk, at the Castro Theater in 1984. A bit of context about this clip and what Vito has to say. This happened on the eve of a presidential election. So it was 1984. Ronald Reagan, conservative Republican, was president. And he was on the cusp, he was on the verge of being reelected, and he was, by a landslide, 49 out of 50 states. So we'll see what Vito has to say about that.
It is my great honor to welcome all of you to the San Francisco premiere of The Times of Harvey Milk at the Castro Theater, which is certainly one of the great theaters left in the United States. This film has absolutely captured the hearts of everyone who has seen it. I don't know if you can understand what's going on around the country right now, because it is simply appears that the film will cross that difficult boundary dividing the gay audience from the mainstream audience, of which gay people are also a part. It's interesting and it's wonderful because it's a film of inherent political impact, perhaps more for young lesbians and gay men than for anyone else. We're in serious trouble in this country right now, and with respect to both gay rights and in the larger area of human rights, we're facing a situation that's a little weird, where many gay people, especially gay men, are about to vote Republican for Ronald Reagan, and because they think that it will protect some of their financial interests, and then after they finish voting for him, his Supreme Court is going to take away their rights. I think what we have on our hands is a film which can reach people and can change that sort of sentiment and let those people know that they have to make a commitment that goes beyond investment, and that they have to realize that there used to be a time in this country when people fought and died for what they believed in, and that Rolex watches and pasta machines won't save them in the end. This film has a chance not only to go on to win an Oscar for Best Documentary, but even more important than winning awards and getting good critical response, to reach people.
So Vito never missed an opportunity to make a political point, usually with great wit. He was truly an activist extraordinaire, from the earliest days of gay liberation in New York to being one of the founders of ACT UP in the 1980s. The next friend I want to bring into the room tonight and introduce you all is Richard Schmeeken, who is my partner on the Times of Harvey Milk. This is Richard. He was a man of incredible moral character. I used to think of him as kind of a gay Abraham Lincoln without the constituency. So let's look at a clip of Richard and me at a life-changing moment in '85 when Vito's prediction actually came true.
And the winner is the Times of Harvey Milk, Robert Epstein and Richard Schmeeken, producers.
What a thrill. Richard and I would like to thank our wonderful crew, particularly Deborah Hoffman, Mark Isham, Harvey Firestein, Greg Bex, Tim O'Shea, and Francis Reed. Personally, I would like to thank my partner in life, John Wright, for all his support during the 6 years it took to get this film made. And finally, a simple thank you to Harvey Milk for reminding us that it's possible to live life with a sense of social responsibility and a sense of humor.
I would like to thank all the many, many people who supported the film, the volunteers, donors, institutional support, our distributor, TC Films. And I would like to also thank Harvey Milk for his courage, for his pride in being gay, and for his hope that one day we will all live together in a world of mutual respect. Thank you.
So I think that gives you a sense of Richard's eloquence and generosity and handsomeness, and I miss him dearly. And what was going on with my hair, I can't speak to that, but whatever. At least I had some. So if not for these three men, Peter, Richard, Vito, there's a good chance I wouldn't be standing here tonight, at least not in this capacity. They were truly my guides into going from boyhood into gay manhood, and I think about them every day. So today, I'm 59, and I'm here by the luck of the draw, fortunate to be able to do what I do, while so many friends have been denied that fortune. My journey with each of these men is not just my story, but it's the story of the early years of the AIDS epidemic, and that's why I invoke their spirits here tonight. So now, I'm going to take us through a more linear chronology, starting with Word Is Out in 1977. So in November of 1977, Word Is Out premiered at the Castro Theater. That same week, Harvey Milk was elected to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, making him the first openly gay elected official voted into office in the state of California. A year after his election, which is just 10 months after he was sworn in, a disgruntled colleague murdered Harvey and San Francisco's mayor, George Moscone. I lived through those tragic events in San Francisco, and that's really what set me on my next trajectory, and that was the documentary, The Times of Harvey Milk. Making The Times of Harvey Milk coincided with the beginning of AIDS. And I remember working on the film late one night and having what was probably one of my first conversations about AIDS. There were 4 of us working in the edit room late that night, all gay men. Greg Bex, who was the associate producer on the film, Tim O'Shea, who was the assistant editor, and Richard Schmeeken, the producer, and myself. It was probably now late 1982. None of us knew anyone yet who was ill, but this mysterious new illness was the subject of our conversation. We all agreed it was extremely disconcerting, but none of us really thought it would have much to do with our personal lives, kind of the way we think of Ebola right now. Just a few months before this conversation, this would have been the summer of '82, I remember dancing at a club in the Russian River, 90 miles north of San Francisco. And I met this dreamy guy and went home with him, and we never whispered the word safer sex to each other. It just wasn't part of the conversation. It wasn't in our consciousness yet. So to take you back to that time, pre-AIDS consciousness, just for the fun of it, I'm gonna play a clip of that great disco soul rock diva, Sylvester.
All right, y'all, this is it, y'all. Come on, Bob. Dance on my feet in the disco heat. Dancing through the night, the morning light shines on me. All that music makes me dance. Come on, get up. Sing it,
That makes me very happy. So while Sylvester provided the soundtrack, we remained clueless about the virus silently infecting so many. We had no way of knowing just how much the way we were living was about to change and how quickly those changes were coming. By 1984, the HIV virus was identified, and that soundtrack began to change. Sylvester would be one of the many San Franciscans lost to what was now called AIDS. In the fall of that year, 1984, the Times of Harvey Milk premiered at the New York Film Festival. One of the interviewees in the film, Bill Krause, an important gay rights activist, was expected to join us on stage that night. When Bill didn't show up, our worst fears were confirmed. This is Bill. And Bill was the first person I knew personally to receive an AIDS diagnosis. He didn't join us that night because he flew to Paris to be treated with an experimental drug, which at that moment in time was believed to help people with AIDS boost their immune systems. Actor Rock Hudson arrived in Paris at the same time for the same reason. Rock Hudson was the first major American celebrity to publicly disclose that he had AIDS, and it really changed the public conversation about the disease and those who could contract it. Unfortunately, the experimental drug proved useless for both of them. Rock died in October 1985, and Bill died just a few months later. Rock Hudson was 59, Bill Krause was 38. 2 years after that late night conversation, AIDS was no longer something that was just out there in the shadows. For every gay man living in San Francisco, it was everywhere and terrifying to behold. I remember going to see my doctor. "Look around you," he said. "This is going to become the lost city of Atlantis." And in many ways, that's what San Francisco became in the late 80s and early 90s. I can't stand here before you tonight and tell you I was an AIDS warrior, someone who represents the bravery and courage those times demanded when so many were dying such horrible deaths. I do, however, represent that lost generation. San Francisco was under siege. It was as if we were at war. I wasn't one of the brave soldiers who were devoting their lives to fighting for HIV drugs or volunteering for AIDS care services. Thankfully, there were thousands of others who were: nurses, doctors, agency staff, many of them with AIDS themselves, heroes all, volunteers who sacrificed so much to do just those very things. But I did capture and share some of the stories and through my film work, and they provide a history unto themselves. The artistic community in San Francisco began doing what artists do best: reflecting, interpreting, and representing the world in which we live, and a world that seemed to be dying all around us. One such artistic endeavor was a local theater production put together by a group of actors, writers, and directors in 1984. The piece was called simply The AIDS Show, an acronym for Artists Involved with Death and Survival. The AIDS Show was essentially a series of vignettes, written and directed and performed by artists looking at the disease head-on at a time when it was nothing less than horrifying. The show was an overnight sensation. It was supposed to run for a weekend at Theater Rhinoceros in San Francisco. It ran for 2 years. The company would also take scenes from the play and perform them at different venues for caregivers and others affected by the epidemic. Peter Adair and I felt compelled to do something about AIDS. It was a time when there was virtually nothing on the networks about the impact of the epidemic. And at that point, television was the main means of communication, the only means of communication in terms of media. So we made a public television documentary about the AIDS Show called simply The AIDS Show. So I'm going to show you now an excerpt from that film.
Whenever a catastrophe hits, be it a flood, an earthquake, a plague, initial reaction is to ask why here, why us, and often we blame ourselves for a loss that is arbitrary. The AIDS epidemic has shaken the very foundation of the gay community. The play offered a vehicle for confronting the crisis. Rob and I asked the creators of the AIDS show to talk about their motivations for participating.
I had a friend who died way, way back in New York in 1981. He was one of the first to go. We didn't know what AIDS was. There was no name for it. We didn't know it was contagious. We had no idea it was sexually transmitted. We didn't know it was anything. We just thought that he alone was ill. And like I was telling you about, I was working in a Broadway theater, tending bar, and he was one of the bartenders, and I'd known him for years. And he was 26 years old, and all of a sudden he just had one thing after another wrong with him. I will never forget, he came in one day, and another image I used in Spice Queen, he'd been the doctor and had some of his toenails removed because of a fungus. And he had these shoes with the toes cut out, and he had white bandages on and big, like, slats sticking out of his shoes. And he weighed about, I don't know, he looked like a concentration camp victim. And he was still coming to work because he didn't know he had a terminal disease. We used to joke about it. We used to make fun of him and tease him and say things behind his back because he was always calling in sick and he always had some ailment. And this was not normal for a 26-year-old man. And we'd call him Camille, and we thought, oh, he was lazy and he just didn't want to take the trash out, and we used to really complain. I did, you know, and it was something I felt very guilty about when he died.
I have a lot of fear about the AIDS crisis. I'm afraid of friends getting sick, naturally. I'm afraid of the hatred that this crisis will stir up. A man called the theater one day and said a friend of his had been accosted on the bus because he had a visible lesion. And the people on the bus threatened his life and eventually threw him off the bus. So this man, his friend, called the theater and asked if we couldn't maybe recommend someone who could help this man out by teaching him to use makeup. That scares me.
Oh, I'm having a really tough time. I am one of those people, I feel, who never really learned how to court, how to date. Living in New York in my 20s, early 30s, I didn't know anybody who did that. I mean, if you were horny, you just went out and found somebody. And I never really learned how to relate to gay men in another than an overtly sexual way. Our identities were largely defined by our sexuality, and now we're being told that we can't have sex. So, what is our identity?
Hello? Arnold! Happy! Oh, no, don't be silly, I just got in. Sleep? Huh, who had time to sleep? Listen, the people here give serious parties. San Francisco, open your golden gate. Oh, you would not believe it. 2 weeks ago, everyone on Christopher Street looked like Nanook of the North, right? And here, the boys are all busting out of their breeches, and chaps, and gym shorts, and oy, girleen. Oh, and hey, you'll never guess who I ran into at the Cauldron. Joe, what's his face? You know, from the other with his love of the... Yeah, no, they broke up. You know, mixed marriages never work. Yeah, well, anyway, you should see what this guy has done to himself. Mr. Schwarzenegger should look so good. Oh, well, I would kill to move in, believe you me. But he already has a roommate. I don't know if they're lovers. It's hard to tell. Everything is so vague here. Anyway, he's sick. No, not Joe, his roommate, Fred or something, I don't know. I don't know, it's some kind of cancer, but it's nothing very serious. He's walking around healthy. Yeah, it is on his leg. How did you know that? Huh, isn't that incredible? What a coincidence. Of course it must be a coincidence. You can't catch cancer like you catch the flu. The gay what? Where did you read that? Honestly, Arnold, I wouldn't believe anything I read in that rag. I take care of myself. Arnold, I have told you 1,000,000 times, I have very good intuition. If somebody has something, I know it. Arnold, listen, sweetie, I really do not have time for this. I'm late enough already as it is, and What do you mean, how do I sound? Half a hit. Arnold, listen, I don't want to hear a lecture from you and Arnold, look, this is a holiday. Give me a break, will you? Arnold, look, I got a really hot date waiting for him at the ambush. I do not have time for... Well, Happy New Year to you, too.
Oh, I fooled around in a Jeep last week. It was hot, but cramped. I had to go to the chiropractor the next day.
Wait a minute, I thought you were Sally Safe Sex. Safe Sex in a Jeep?
We had the emergency brake on.
You and your safe sex, I figure, I don't have it by now, I'm not going to get it.
But there's a 5-year incubation period.
Oh, give me a break. Look, you can get hit by a truck crossing the street.
Darling, you get AIDS. You wish you had been.
Listen, you don't have to give up everything. I mean, you can still have a good time without exchanging body fluids.
Oh, body fluids. I love body fluids. I miss body fluids. I want body fluids.
What about kissing?
You can't kiss?
Is spit body fluid?
They used to say wet kissing was okay as long as there was no blood exchange.
Blood?
Like from flossing.
Oh, that's too much.
But now, they have a pamphlet out that says June 1984 safe sex practices, and they list wet kissing as possibly safe.
So, if you kiss before June, you're okay?
Hey, again.
What weapon is tattooed on Glenn Campbell's arm?
Oh, you're making that up.
Glenn Campbell has a tattoo? Oh, baby.
You mean guys really go along with it?
Most. Some get belligerent. After it's all over, I just say, hey, you're lucky you met me tonight instead of somebody else.
Do you ever use a rubber?
A gun.
You use a gun? On Glenn Campbell's arm?
Glenn Campbell has a rubber tattooed on his arm.
No, a gun, but you're wrong. It's a dagger. Huh?
That's ridiculous. Who would know that?
Tanya Tucker.
But I like sex. I like to get drunk and smoke grass and use poppers and sleep with strangers. Call me old-fashioned, but that's what I like.
Ask any mother. They don't stay young for long. Broke my heart when he left home, go live in California. I love you, Mama, but I can never be what you want me to be. At the time, I couldn't understand that. What was so terrible about growing up and getting married and becoming the mayor of the town? At least coach at the high school. I didn't have much imagination then, but he did. He was going to go to California, get himself on the radio. Well, he didn't. Almost did, but he didn't. He wound up as cameraman for one of them educational TV stations out there. Well, I was so proud of him. One day I was doing my ironing, watching one of them San Francisco stations, because that's where he lived. Do you know what? There he was, sitting on some kind of panel or something. I reached for the telephone and started to call my friend, Muriel. Then they announced what the show was about. I hung up on Muriel without even waiting to say hello. My boy was sitting there with another boy, talking about being family in the same house. You know what I mean? Even if I didn't understand him. And I knew he was raised right. I saw to that. For months and months, I just kept asking myself one question. Why? Why my boy? When my son got sick, I asked myself that same question again. By the time I got myself to California, my son was in the hospital.
my boy, because there was so many machines hooked up to him. After some hours, the doctor came in to talk to me. He said it was time to make a decision. He said it was my decision. I looked at my son's friend. No, doctor, I said, it's our decision.
Patronize me.
Can I use the phone?
Dear, you've called Donnie 3 times already.
The line was busy.
Trouble in paradise?
I'm sure it was a business call.
What does he do anyway?
He's a businessman.
What kind of business?
Well, all sorts. He has, holdings. Hi, honey, it's Puppy Poo.
Puppy Poo? Maybe he's a vet. Let's do the song one more time. We're just getting
I get to be Diana.
Oh, you're just...
can be Diana.
What about the noise? You used to be so worried about your neighbors.
Fuck them. If they don't like it, they can go to a hotel for the night.
I thought you liked them.
That was before they asked me not to use the washing machine and to put my trash in sealed bags.
Time step?
Assholes! You know, I'd like to die a noble death filled with love for all mankind, but I think I'm too smart for that. As if it's not bad enough to be dying, I'm supposed to be embarrassed about it.
Have you told your mother yet?
How can I tell her? It'll kill her. When I was going to the clinic the other day, there was this guy in the elevator with his mother. I don't know if I could put my mom through that.
She must love you a lot.
Of course she does. She's my mother. I'm sorry. I wanted this to be fun, like old times.
I had fun yesterday. Don't worry about it.
Okay, let's play a game.
Trivia? I don't feel like it.
Oh, sure, I'm sorry. I was just trying to...
I know, we're all trying.
Well, just remember, we're here for you.
Do you have to say things like that? You sound so melodramatic.
Well, I'm just trying to be supportive.
Well, stop being supportive and just be my friend. Be nasty the way you used to. That's what I miss most, you know, besides sex. People being nasty.
I know what you mean.
Me too, bitch. Thank you for that. You know, I think this has been hardest on you. You're afraid of me, aren't you? It's funny. While you're lying awake at night, wondering how you'd feel if the shoe was on the other foot, I'm lying awake thinking the same thing. It's not fair. I had safe sex for over a year, and I've got it.
I know it's not fair. But I've changed, really. I was just kidding about the safe sex. I do it. Sometimes I'm so scared I can't get it up anyway.
Do you want to rest? Do you want to go to sleep?
I don't know what I want.
Is there any ice in the kitchen? I'm thirsty.
Hi, how you doing? Oh, not much. How about you? Oh, I can go in for anything. The raunchier, the better. Where are you calling from? Oh, I'm in San Francisco. Oh, I'm 6'2", 160 pounds, blonde hair, green eyes, swimmer's build. Sounds hot. What are you wearing?
Who are you talking to?
I don't know. Well, some guy from Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh? Who? I don't know. It was the sex line. You know, Robert.
1 o'clock in the morning.
I know.
Well, it must be 4 there.
Yeah, pretty wild town, that Pittsburgh.
I thought you stopped doing that kind of stuff.
What's the big deal?
The big deal is I don't enjoy getting woken up at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Well, I'm sorry.
To find you out here in the living room with a stranger.
Robert, he lives in Pittsburgh. Okay. I'll call him back right now and tell him I never want to hear his voice again. What was his name? Oh, yeah, Slave Boy. I'll call information.
Come on back to bed. I'll give you a nice massage, and in the morning...
No, I can't stand any more of that goddamn massage. I want to make love the way people are supposed to. I want to feel like you're my... Every night you're here, Robert, I lie in bed thinking, who is this man in my bed? Would he be here if it weren't for this? I mean, be honest with me, Robert. If we had met 3 years ago, would we have been anything more than a one-night stand?
Even if we can never have sex the old way again, for me, nothing beats the feeling of holding a nice warm body in the dark. Jesus, Murray, all this talk about sex. You could be in a car accident, paralyzed from the waist down. It wouldn't change how I feel for you.
Huh. Sort of like Jane Fonda. You know, in that movie with John Voight, when he goes down on her, the look on her face, oh, honey, they won Oscars for that performance. I'm sorry.
Listen, if what we have isn't working for you, so be it. I just want you to know that, because I know I've never said it to you before, I feel lucky to be with you.
Mr. Brown, I love you too.
Hi, honey. I don't know if you can hear me or not. I just need to talk with you right now, so I will. Maybe you're listening. Come here a lot now. Watch the bay and the Golden Gate. Ship sailing out to sea. Think of you as being here. So much has happened since you died. Just about a year's gone by, Earth time. Sometimes at work or when I'm sitting in your room, I'll glance at a picture of you and suddenly I'm someplace else, another time. Two of us standing next to that icy creek on Mount Hood, or are you walking up the beach near Sarita's house? I remember you didn't want me to take that picture because you weighed 185 pounds. I don't have any pictures of you when you weighed 90. I felt so helpless then. To provide you with whatever it was you really needed. I guess you needed something I couldn't give you. I miss you so much. I just want to hold you in my arms again, close, warm. Sometimes my whole body aches from the hollow feeling. There's nothing I can do about it except sit back. Hurts. God, it hurts sometimes. I had always assumed that we would grow old together, somewhere in the country. Houses we built ourselves, Joe, Marky, sunny days carrying wood. Maybe we are old. Anyway, your mother called me on Mother's Day. She's okay. We keep in touch. When we were hanging up, I said, I love you. And she said, what? I said, I love you. I just want to make sure I heard you right, she said, because I love you too. I did not have an estate sale, just as you requested. I gave a lot of things away to friends. I kept some things. I kept your dance costumes. Your closet. Your closet still smells like you. Sometimes I stick my head in there. I take a great big whiff. I know someday it'll just smell like regular closet again. Well, not much else to say, I guess. Except that I love you. I always will.
So the H show is not only just a great example of how community art can be cathartic, it's also a beautiful example of a community taking care of itself, because a lot of information was conveyed in that piece, and at a time when certainly the government wasn't taking on imparting that information. The community was really kind of depending on itself. When we completed the H show in '86, almost 2,000 gay men in San Francisco had died of AIDS. 2 years later, by the time Jeffrey Friedman and I started the film Common Threads, 35,000 had died of AIDS in the US alone. Nothing brought this striking reality of the ever-increasing numbers more poetically alive than the Names Project AIDS quilt. Here it is at its inaugural display on the Washington, D.C. Mall in 1988. When Jeffrey Friedman and I first saw the quilt here at the mall, we were with our friend Peter Adair, and Peter's first words were, somebody should make a film about this. I don't know why it wasn't Peter, but Jeffrey and I took him at his word, and after attending the inaugural display of the quilt, we went back to San Francisco and went to the Names Project workshop. At that point, the Names Project workshop, which was in the Castro in San Francisco, functioned as a kind of community center. It's really where people came to make quilts for their loved ones. There are dozens and dozens of volunteers there at all hours of the day and night, and where the panels were assembled. So I went and began reading a lot of the letters that came in with all of the panels. When people sent in a letter, they'd write a letter. When they sent in a panel, they'd write a letter about their loved one. And I went through, read, hundreds and hundreds of letters. And of course, they were all incredibly moving. But one that really jumped out at me was from a naval commander, a US naval commander named Tracy Torrey. Tracy had made a panel for his lover, David. So I called Tracy as part of our research, and we talked for a while, and he told me that he had AIDS and didn't have long to live. By the end of the conversation, he said he was going to come to San Francisco because he wanted to make his own panel so it would match the panel that he made for his lover, David, anticipating that there would be no one to make that panel for him when he died. He also invited us to film his story. At that point, we were still in the research phase for the film. We weren't funded. We were far from starting production. But there was no way we could deny that request and that offering. So we pulled together a small camera crew. Tracy was staying at Beck's Motor Lodge, a block from the Names Project in the Castro. And that's the first and only time I ever met Tracy Torrey. You'll see him in a minute being interviewed. He's lying on the bed, covered in Kaposi sarcoma lesions, which at that point was a very common form of cancer for people with AIDS. Eventually, our film, Common Threads, which Tracy's one of the interviewees in, received funding from HBO, and we are eternally grateful to HBO because they really came on board at a time when very few broadcasters were doing much of anything on the subject. So here's, well, before I show the clip, I just want to preface it by saying getting the financing for HBO meant that we knew we were going to be making a film for a general audience. And that was an incredible opportunity at that point in 1988, and also an incredible responsibility. So in showing the first part of the film, Common Threads, I think you'll get a sense of our thinking and how we chose the stories for the film.
Is that some infectious agent is causing...
Well, there's an epidemic, a disease that's a killer.
This probably means they are dealing with some new, deadly, sexually transmitted disease. One of the most frightening medical mysteries of modern
The
times.
man with the most publicized case of AIDS, Rock Hudson, flew home from Paris today on a chartered 747 jet. Hudson's
Rock
6'4"
Hudson returned
frame...
to Los Angeles and was immediately flown to UCLA Medical Center. It was there that Hudson learned he has AIDS.
It took Rock Hudson's death to capture America's attention. By that time, AIDS had already killed 15,000 other Americans. Rock Hudson is the most famous name in a giant quilt, a memorial to tens of thousands of men, women, and children who came along very different roads to the same fate.
Ron Winters, Wayne Field,
David
Ray Wright Jr.,
Rand Bazimkowski,
Edward Richards,
Fred, Andy,
Billy,
Bob,
Juan Jimenez,
David,
Bob Flood, David J. Duck.
So, hard to believe now, but in 1988, when we made this film, most Americans were pretty clueless about AIDS. So the film had the responsibility, as we saw it, to humanize the epidemic, to put a human face on it, and to get an American television audience, because we made it for an American television audience, to have some experience of what it felt like to love someone with AIDS and lose someone with AIDS. It was that simple. So we're now 27 years after this quilt sequence was filmed, and thankfully we have a very different perspective on HIV/AIDS. We also are now able to have more of a historical perspective, as evidenced by such great films as David France's How to Survive a Plague and David Weissman's We Were Here. Recently, Jeffrey and I made a short film for HBO to add to that historical perspective about two early heroines of the epidemic actress Elizabeth Taylor and research scientist Dr. Matilda Krim. These two women from very different backgrounds became unlikely allies, together helping to form the first AIDS research foundation called AMFAR, the American Foundation for AIDS Research. Both of these women dedicated themselves to the cause early. Back in 1981, soon after the very first cases of AIDS were reported, Dr. Krim dedicated herself to increasing public awareness of AIDS and to a better understanding of its cause and how it was transmitted. Elizabeth Taylor used her fame and her sex appeal to bring attention to the issue. Here they are. That's Dr. Krim and Elizabeth Taylor. So we'll look at a very short clip of the Battle of AMFAR.
A recently discovered disease found among homosexual men is also affecting non-homosexuals.
Fear was rampant through all aspects of society.
And as yet, no one with AIDS has been cured.
I wondered, is this going to be a virus that will just wipe out the whole species? I thought maybe this is the end of the world right now.
To think about a cure back in the early days wasn't even on the radar.
Most people start with this idea they can't do anything. Because I am only a little guy, you know, I can't have an effect on public policy. It's not so, you know, everybody can do something.
I was made so aware of this huge, loud silence regarding AIDS that I finally thought to myself, bitch, do something yourself. You do your bit with all of your heart, and I do my bit with all of my heart, and everybody out there does the same thing. We will make a goddamn difference.
Okay, so here we are in 2015. Much has changed in North America and most of the developed world, at least those privileged to have access to treatment. The tide continues to turn away from people with dying of AIDS and more towards those living with HIV. New and improved treatment options continue to keep the virus undetectable, making it more difficult to transmit. There are also biomedical options for those at risk of becoming infected, including PrEP and PEP, and soon rectal and vaginal microbicides. And there's even renewed hope for a vaccine and an eventual cure. But while living in this time of hope, and as I look back to that late night in the editing room while making the Times of Harvey Milk, I want to always remember those who didn't make it. We lost Richard at 45. Greg Becks, the associate producer on the Times of Harvey Milk, died at age 33. Vito died 5 years after the premiere of Harvey Milk at age 44. And Peter died just months before medical cocktails were introduced, making HIV a manageable illness. So even as the gap between my lifespan and theirs grows wider, I continue to look to them for inspiration. I look to them to remind me of the values that I hold most important: to live a creative life, to be kind, to not take anyone's shit, to speak truth to power, and to be brave. Their spirits and the stories of who they are with me always. They help me to remember how lucky I've been to survive and to be able to go on having so many years full of life, friends, travel, of making movies, of finding love. And they remind me that fear lives in the mind and that courage comes from the heart. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Do I stand up here?
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you so much. Just a tremendous thanks. I'm sure glad that you changed your mind.
Me too.
So at this moment, I just want to ask our president, Dr. Shepard, to come forward and share some concluding remarks. And then we will follow with a Q&A, so you can be thinking about your questions.
Hi, Liz, how are you? And hi, thank you for coming. I'm just going to say a very few words. It's a great honor and pleasure to welcome you to our campus and to see so many members of the Concordia community and the Greater Montreal community here with us. The video clips really took me back, I got to say. Some of them reminded me why it was a great idea to emigrate from Texas to Canada, and what a great country this is. It was a great talk. There were moments that were obviously very sad and difficult. It brought me back. In 1984, I saw the Times of Harvey Milk when it first was released, and also the Common Threads. And the Common Threads was released at roughly the time that pieces of the quilt came to my graduate school where I was studying at the time. And it was a very moving kind of experience for us then. It was moving to see it again tonight. I just wanted to say a couple words about the idea of liberty. So filmmaking is, it looks like a fun kind of job. I suspect it's hard work and stressful, as well as fun. At least that's what all my friends who do this kind of work tell me. But it has a very important role to play in terms of social justice, in terms of liberty. And as recent events in the world have reminded us, whether it's Nigeria or Paris or wherever it may be, there's always somebody around to take away somebody else's liberty, whether it be from an HIV diagnosis or from some other cause. So that kind of extremism is always bad and must always be denounced. And all the way back to the Times of Harvey Milk, it was denounced in your films. HIV is an illness that affects many people from many walks of life. But I'm thinking in particular of my own gay friends whose quilt pieces are there today, and of gay, lesbian, and trans people around the world who often don't enjoy the kind of safety and protection and good medical care that we're so fortunate to have here, and keep them in mind as we go forward. Thank you so much for coming to Concordia. We're really pleased to have you here.
So I'm just going to quickly explain the rules of the game. If you remember, you just raise your hand and a flashy person with a microphone is going to arrive.
So you want to have a question?
One of the things I think is really interesting about Harvey Milk, we've talked about this, is that it is one of the original Kickstarter campaigns. You did like a 10 or 15 minute reel because this story was so inspirational, and you went around to people and said, look, if you just give us $500 or $1,000 or whatever, or $10, you're doing this huge thing. That's why at the end of the film, if people have seen it, you notice a huge number of credits, people you're thanking. And I just wonder if you talk a little bit about that, because that was obviously visionary. That's now the way a lot of people are making social issue films.
Well, it made sense for that film to involve the community, and we did cocktail parties at people's homes and solicited contributions anywhere from $10 to $1,000, and we did a brochure. I mean, it's really a different time, and a mailing. We did a direct mail campaign, which was the equivalent of a quick Kickstarter campaign then. And that raised probably about a third of the budget. The film cost $300,000 then, and a third of it came from community fundraising. Anybody have any answers, if no questions?
Other questions? Or comments?
I didn't think Canadians were so shy.
Thank you. It was eye-opening. I remember seeing when I was, I guess, 13, maybe I saw part of that film, Common Threads, in sex ed class. I guess it was in grade 8 in Toronto.
Progressive class?
Yeah, it was a progressive school, I guess, art school. Catholic, though. Yeah, although I guess our teacher was gay. We didn't know that at the time, but yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's a, I guess growing up gay is something you think about every day, is HIV and AIDS, and it's, I don't know, I don't have any answers about it now, but I guess I would be curious about something that struck me that I've thought about in terms of AIDS fatalities, and sort of some of the comments that your friends made, that people that were dying were making about like existential sort of emptiness, that question of, who are we if we're not, our sex lives or whatever it might be. And I think that's something now that is a question, questions I ask myself. I mean, and I don't live a gay life that was, like the comment about Atlantis, the end of Atlantis, like I imagine it was this sort of gay utopia in San Francisco in the 70s when there was nothing to worry about, and it was just gay rights, gay liberation was happening. You could be gay, you found people, all that kind of stuff. So this, seems like such a cruel way that utopia was destroyed. But then at the same time, it seems like AIDS provided a lot of basis for community and for people rallying together around the importance of life.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, you said
any
it
thoughts?
all. You said it all. That's very true. It was such a sharp pendulum swing, and that's what I tried to give some sense of how compressed that time was, where the pendulum just swung from one end of the continuum to the other. But yeah, it was, in terms of what happened in the community then, it was profound. Especially in the earliest years when we were completely on our own, and the government couldn't deal with it in any sense whatsoever. And the community took care of its own in every sense. And it was hard to ask those existential questions, when none of us had any experience with dying and dealing with young people dying. It was a lot to try and understand in the moment.
Yes, good evening. Thank you very much for this amazing presentation this evening. My question is, how today your work has influenced today's politics in either HIV or gay politics today?
I can't speak to that. I have no perspective on that. I rely on you all. To tell me that. I mean, anecdotally, I hear from people, and that's a wonderful thing. Like Matthew tonight, I hear what people's experiences were when they first saw the film, or this fellow having seen the film in 8th grade sex education class. So, I mean, that's what you do it for. That's why you make films. So, great to get that kind of contact with people.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. This has been one of my favorite lectures I've seen as part of the HIV/AIDS series. I'm somebody who grew up in San Francisco in the 90s, so after the HIV/AIDS epidemic was happening. And a lot of my generation gets to see these stories through narrative films, especially Milk and also Dallas Buyers Club. And I'm wondering two things, what you think about the narrative film and the way that they've handled these stories, and also kind of the difference between the documentary film and the narrative film and the ways that the stories can be told through both.
Well, working backwards, narrative films like Milk and Dallas Buyer Club reach such a wider audience. You know, unless you really break through with a documentary like Michael Moore, you sort of top out at a certain level, and that's way below the level of reach that a feature film has with all the distribution money behind it to get the film out there and seen. So that's the difference, just in terms of the reach. In terms of the subject, documentaries pave the way for those films. I mean, that's the nature of documentary filmmaking, and I think that documentaries kind of bring the issue to light, and then the feature world, especially the film industry, can then embrace that story and run with it in a whole other way. So they're both necessary. They're both really important and reach very different audiences, I think, ultimately.
Hi. Well, thank you very much. Again, I'll reiterate what you said about this being a really great lecture. My question kind of relates to that a little bit. I'd imagine, especially when you're making a documentary on something that's topical, and especially something that people are kind of not wanting to talk about, something that's has people on the fence and things like that. I would imagine it would be kind of hard in terms of funding to get something like this going. So I guess my question would be, what advice would you have for, say, a young filmmaker or someone who is trying to get these sort of films financed and get them in circulation? What sort of advice would you have for someone like that?
Passion. You know, if you have the passion for your subject and you have to get that film made, you'll find a way to get it made. And that's really what it takes. It takes that kind of, I'm going to do this come hell or high water. And that doesn't happen with every project. You know, there's some projects you really don't have that passion for, and they either don't get made or whatever. But the ones that you really know have to get made, you'll find a way to do it. And it takes that kind of commitment. Are you working on something? Are you working on a project? Okay.
I was wondering about the question of tone, because you're dealing with such emotional material, and yet it seems to be very, very well planned, and your climaxes, and how do you plan that out, or is it intuitive? And going along with that, how do you plan the music?
Great questions. Both Times of Harvey Milk and Common Threads were structured before we actually started shooting, and that happened in the research phase, so we had some sense of what the arc of the film would be and what the act structure would be. So they're really approached narratively in that way. And cast, essentially. I mean, we knew the kinds of people we wanted to tell the story in both of those films, and then we did our research to find who among the possible candidates we thought would work best, and we actually made those determinations by doing video pre-interviews, so we could see how they actually worked on camera. In terms of the music, when you're editing, you usually, are you a filmmaker, by the way? Yeah. So when you're editing, you work with temp music. You find a music that's close to the tone of what you want the sequence to be. So for example, with Common Threads, the unfolding, we worked with not ironically, but not obviously, a Carly Simon track called Let the River Run, which was from the Mike Nichols film Working Girl. And it was a chorus of voices. And we used it because we liked the idea of having that kind of human quality to the score. And that led us to think, well, what composer works with human voice? And I was actually in a restaurant one day and I saw Bobby McFerrin and I thought, oh, well, Bobby McFerrin. And wrote him a letter and he saw the film and he agreed to do it. So that score in Common Threads is all vocal, Bobby McFerrin, and he put together a group of singers to do that score. So yeah, you find the tone just through an experimentation, and then you talk with a composer about the kind of tone you're going for, using that temp piece as a reference point.
Hello, thank you for that. So just another anecdote as far as the breadth of reach of your work. I saw quite a few of your films in Warsaw, Poland,
Wow.
with a small community, an organized community.
Well, I just was in Poland. I was just in Bydgoszcz.
Brilliant. Oh, that's
The
nice.
Carmimage.
So just so I can tell them all about it, what are you working on now?
Well, I'm very reluctant to talk about things when they're in process, because until a project is really underway, it's just talk. So none of the projects we have are in production yet, but we have four different projects. 3 of them are scripted narrative. More recently, Jeffrey and I have been working in scripted narrative as well as documentary, so we have a couple of other feature projects we're trying to get going. Thanks for asking.
Undoubtedly, progress has been made, in part because of efforts of people like yourself. But at the same time, do you not think that that once danger has been reduced, there's a certain amount of complacency that has taken its place? Surely, if we look at many of the world's tragedies today, like Ebola, like Darfur, the same kind of reaction that happened in the 80s and AIDS is still taking place. What suggestions can you make to somehow reactivate that kind of passion that doesn't seem to be happening today?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we can take anything for granted. You know, you have to look at history to remind yourself that nothing can be taken for granted. So I think we have to continue to learn from our own history. As the specifics of Ebola, I'm not informed enough to really speak to that, although I think there's a turn there. I think there's some improvement, hopefully.
Thank you for coming out. At the time you released Common Threads, I'm sure there had already been a lot of voices not so sympathetic that were stirred up, and I was wondering if you encountered any kind of maybe oppressive elements in the creation of that film, after the film, and if you could relate a little bit about that, whether as a filmmaker or as a person.
I can't think of any. I mean, after Common Threads aired on HBO, we got, tons of letters from people. Really very moving, handwritten letters from people who had seen it. So I really can't think of any that I encountered. I don't know, maybe it's out there. The only film we got some reaction from in the making was The Cellulite Closet. And it was from people like Charlton Heston and film studios that we need permission from in order to use film clips. But I can't think of any on Common Threads.
What was Heston's reaction?
Heston, we had to get clearance from him for a performance. He played Michelangelo. And we had a whole sequence of biopics of historical figures who were known to be homosexual, who Hollywood portrayed as heterosexual, one of which was Michelangelo. And Heston wrote us this incredible letter, which we have framed in our office, about how he knows Buonarroti, and many in the homosexual community may want to claim him as their own, but their wish has no wings. Thank you all.
You know, as I was thinking about this presentation this evening, I was thinking that for those of us who know your work, as I was listening to the presentation this evening, I was thinking about for those of us who know your work, this has been such a lovely and deep introduction or presentation of your inspirations. But I'm sure many of you want to know more about the films that were mentioned this evening. And so I wanted to remind you that there is a retrospective at the Cinematheque that begins this evening. Tomorrow night, the Times of Harvey Milk will be playing at 8:30 at the Cinematheque, and Rob will be present to answer questions about that film. I'd also like to remind you, my second pitch of the evening, that this incredible series runs on the kind donations of those of you in the room. So if you like what you saw and you want more of this, there's many ways to donate to this project. I'd also like to do some final thank yous for this event this evening. I'd like to once again thank Viv Healthcare. I'd like to thank the Office of the President at Concordia University. I'd like to thank Johnny Forever, who's been who made these fabulous posters that you've been seeing up here. I'd like to thank the teaching team of HIV/AIDS at Concordia University, Karen Herland, Gregory Rodriguez-Arbele, the teaching assistants Florencia Marchetti, and Nora Butler-Burke. Without your incredibly hard work, this would not be possible. I'd also like to thank Tom Wall, who's sitting close to the front row, who's the director of the HIV/AIDS project. And I'd like to thank Ian Bradley Perrin, the HIV/AIDS Community Lecture Series Coordinator. Thanks to such an incredibly inspiring team. For more information about the HIV/AIDS project and community lecture series, you can visit the website. It's aidsconcordia.ca. You can also visit the Facebook or Twitter sites. And I'd also like to remind you that on March 5th, there's another inspiring lecture, and it just disappeared, but it might come back. Oh, but there we, well, okay. It's with Esther Boussicault, thank you, Stanislas, and she is a Haitian HIV community health organizer and international healthcare advocate. So once again, I want to deeply thank Rob for such an inspiring event this evening, and thank all of you for coming out. I hope I see you soon again. Thank you.